Welcome to 28 Days and Beyond.
The show where we talk about our history, our heritage, and our culture.
I'm Amari.
I'm Kharisma. Welcome.
What's up?
What's up, AJ?
Hey, everything is cool. How about yourself?
I didn't even ask you that yet. You jumped the gun.
You said, what's up? I said, everything is cool. Anyway, so I wanted to talk about something today that I'm pretty excited conversation. You know what I'm saying? Exciting conversation. I wanted to fill you in, get your thoughts, get your ideas.
Fill our viewers in
everybody
too?
At the same time. You know what I mean? It's a collective experience. So check this. I know you well enough to know that you have quite a bit of entrepreneurial friends.
Yes.
Right. It's something that we see, right? A lot of people are turning towards entrepreneurship. You know, technological outlets are allowing, people to have the avenues to pursue their entrepreneurial aspirations.
Yes,
It's a whole bunch of syllables.
and to work within their gifts.
Within their gifts, exactly. When it comes to economic empowerment, which is something that Black people have been talking about for years, right? The need for economic empowerment in the Black community. My question is this entrepreneurial wave, that has a negative connotation, but is this entrepreneurial presence going to ultimately, ameliorate the economic woes that face the Black community, my sister?
Well, I certainly hope so.
Right.
Also, kudos for pulling out the SAT words.
I mean, I do it every now and again. Right.
I think that's the goal, right? So people, I think, are becoming entrepreneurs for a few reasons. One, because not everybody is built for the whole 9-to-5 structure, right? Not everybody's built to be in an office. But also, it gives you an opportunity to create your own schedule and figure out what it is that you enjoy doing that's going to bring you what you need to live. Because money is a tool, right? We all need it. So are you going to work for 40 hours a week doing something that you may or may not like, or are you going to take the reins and figure out a way to hopefully make more money? But also, we've heard a lot of conversations about creating generational wealth.
Right.
Like, that's a conversation that's happening very often in our
That's very
community.
good. That is very good, because we often have entrepreneurs on the show who are doing amazing things.
Yes.
And what you addressed was really about the sort of individual fulfillment that comes from that. I'm really curious about the communal fulfillment that ultimately comes, right? So does the economic advancement of an individual necessarily benefit the community, right? And that's one of the things.
I have my thoughts.
Well, we're definitely going to be talking about that today. We're joined by Taylor Washington, who is a senior poli-sci major at Villanova. She's also the president of the Black Student Union, and she will be joining us to talk about this and much more when we come back on 28 Days and Beyond.
Welcome back to 28 Days and Beyond. We are now joined by Taylor Washington.
Hello, hello. Thank you.
So Taylor, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I am a senior at Villanova University. I am the current president of the Black Student Union here on campus. I'm also just trying to graduate, secure employment. I have, in my past, I've done a lot both in politics and also in finance. And right now I'm actually interning within a private equity firm in the city of Philadelphia. So a lot of exciting things, but just me.
So before the break, Kharisma and I were talking about not only entrepreneurship within the Black community, but really more so economic empowerment in different avenues. So I know a lot of folks believe that things like entrepreneurship, opening businesses, supporting Black business is going to lead to economic empowerment for the whole community. And while there may be some validity to that, I don't think that's the whole story. Based off of your experience, what do you have to say on that?
That's a really good question. I would say that from what I've seen both like the grassroots of things, and I've also seen like the high-level corporations and how they operate. And I think it's really interesting because, for example, in private equity, the entire concept is to go find startup businesses, small businesses, and then buy a majority stake, fix them up into something big, scale them, and make them whatever you want them to be. So I've seen the simple fact that you can't do it alone. And I think a lot of times within the Black community, because we've been forced to do it alone, we have the idea that, okay, now we have to do it alone. And by alone, I mean by ourselves as individuals instead of, within each other as a community. And so I think that the first thing that needs to break is that mentality that you have to go about everything by yourself. And then the second thing is also, once you do make it wherever you're trying to go, kind of going back and helping people along the way and not really forgetting where you came from and the things you overcame to get there. Because a lot of times people, you know, get to the point where it's like, oh, I've earned this spot, I deserve this spot now. Not that they were fortunate enough to have the opportunity to land there.
Well, that was one of the other things we were talking about off camera, just this idea of getting back to community. Something that I remember even, you know, growing up was going to the store in the neighborhood, and everybody knew the owner, and it was greetings and how are your parents, how's your family, you know. So this idea of really looking at even people that are, you know, in our neighborhoods as people that are contributing to this idea that we are a community, and as entrepreneurs the goal should be building wealth, but building wealth so that you can give back to the community.
Now, what's interesting about that, though, is that there's something fundamentally different from what you said about private equity, though, because for private equity, the idea is to scale. The idea is to put, you know, a big box store in small neighborhood, right? You see what I'm saying? Like, I know I live in Germantown. Don't be trying to come find where I'm at, but the point is, one of the big debates right now is that Germantown High School was purchased, right, in some questionable methods, and they're trying to convert it to a big box retail store, and people were like, not in our neighborhood, we don't believe in that sort of thing. So from a private equity standpoint, you're saying the idea is to scale it and make it big and, you know, put it into not a multinational corporation, but at least a public corporation or things like that. What you're talking about, though, is something that's much more localized, that doesn't necessarily have the potential to bring in billions of dollars, but does sustain the community. What do you think about that?
I think that there's a place for both. I think that if you have a world that exists with either one in isolation, it's not going to be an ideal world. I definitely see the value of having, especially within communities, having those, like, they're almost like, you know, strongholds where you know the people there, you spend a lot of time there, you frequent there, and their goal isn't to run the world one day. Their goal is just to be a contributing member of the society. And I think it's interesting because when you look at a lot of Black communities, you see the businesses within the communities nobody looks like the people in the communities.
Right.
Exactly.
And as a result, nobody is trying to contribute to the communities. They're just taking and leaving instead of staying and contributing. And it ends up becoming a big problem later on.
We have to take a break right now, but I want to talk a little bit more about that idea to some of the downsides of these larger things, particularly things like Amazon and how they make it difficult for local businesses to stay in operation. We'll talk about that and more when we come back on 28 Days and Beyond.
Sounds good.
Welcome back to 28 Days and Beyond. So a little bit before the break, we were talking about, you know, the idea of small businesses versus big businesses, and you mentioned Amazon. Interestingly enough, the neighborhood that I grew up in, they're actually turning the Bury building, which is this huge, huge building that's been abandoned since I can remember. I never remember it being a working factory, but they're turning that into a Marriott. And, you know, seeing those plans develop for the city, one of the first things I started seeing in that neighborhood is the gentrification is now starting to happen, because now that neighborhood is going to be bringing in all this money. And what often happens, instead of these big businesses coming in neighborhoods, like you said, and bringing wealth back to the community, instead they push the native folks out and bring other people in. So what are your thoughts?
I think that's really interesting, and I think it's definitely an issue when that happens. And I think a lot of that stems from when companies focus too much on shareholders and not stakeholders. So like right now you see, of course you focus on the people that have a monetary stake in the company, but there are people with other stakes in the company. So there's environmental factors, there's people like locals in that neighborhood, those are all stakeholders. And there are a few companies, one of the larger ones off the top of my head is JP Chase. So they've been taking more of a stakeholder approach to the way they've been interacting with their environment. But then there's others where they just haven't caught up yet. And I think that when people don't have that idea that stakeholders matter too, you have those kind of you have that kind of clash where you have communities being torn apart because of these decisions.
But there's a moral assumption, or the assumption of a moral obligation that these corporations would have. They don't care about these so-called stakeholders, because the financial stakeholders or shareholders, as you mentioned, are the ones who really are what make things move at the end of the day. Because as you're talking, I'm thinking about it's really interesting though that you do see mom and pop stores opening in gentrified neighborhoods because you get the independent bookstores, the independent coffee shops and things like that that were not a viable option, right? When the previous inhabitants, right, were in there because there were no resources invested in that neighborhood. I'm really curious about ways forward for black communities that want to continue to be black communities that control the resources and the means and the institutions that govern those communities. Now, of course, we have to ask ourselves, where do those communities actually exist, right? We know there are some of them, but at the same time, it's like you mentioned earlier, a lot of these businesses, people are coming from outside of the community, and those dollars are not circulating within that community.
Into the community.
Yeah.
Right.
I think there's this misconception that excellence means not black. And I think that in the past we were able to kind of get a grasp on being able to pursue excellence and also show that in a black way. And I'm speaking more specifically about like Black Wall Street, which was way a long time ago, but you know, they were showing what you could be, you know, and today, when you walk into certain black-owned establishments and it's like, just because you're black-owned doesn't mean you have a pass from me, a black person, to be less than quality than the ones that you're next to, you know? And I think that pursuit of excellence will pull anybody in, not just African-American clients. But I think that idea kind of needs to be broken, that you kind of get a pass within the community just because you're trying to support it. You have to still strive to be the best that you can be to get a customer base.
Yeah, definitely so. I mean, yeah.
No, I was going to say, and how do we continue to hold each other accountable, really, because that's what it boils down to in terms of making sure that, okay, if we're saying as a collective, the goal is to make sure that we are supporting and putting money back into those communities, how are we making sure that the people that are saying, okay, I want to be a part of that movement, how are we making sure that they're accountable to the people that are in those communities?
I would definitely say community support. So I think that one of the things that could really help is if people are able to come together and pool what they do have, you know, so that people can help further other people along, because you can't lift someone up from the bottom, but you can help pull them up if you're already above. And I think that there's a lot of people that are already above that really are kind of skipping out on what I feel as though is an obligation to where they came from. And I think that once we get the people above to help out, because we already have the people below trying to push up, you know? So once we have the people above trying to help out, we can kind of strengthen ourselves there and become structurally sound.
Wow. I mean, I love the conversation. Unfortunately, we ran out of time, but we want to thank you so much for coming and sharing your perspective with us, Taylor.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
We'll be back with more 28 Days and Beyond right after this.
Welcome back to 28 Days and Beyond. Kharisma.
Yes.
Taylor was dropping some jewels.
Yes.
Some jewelry.
Some gems,
Some gems,
if you will.
as they say, yeah.
What was the big takeaway for you?
I still think there's a conflict for me between the idea of, big business versus local business. You know what I mean? I think that.
Can those two things coexist?
I mean, sure.
That wasn't believable.
I'm really like, yo, but what is a different model altogether? You know what I mean? I don't really have much more thoughts to develop beyond that, but what about you?
Yeah, I think Taylor brought up a really good point, which is that, you already have people that are trying to make their way up from the bottom. It really is about keeping that communal flow, and the people that are becoming entrepreneurs and are attaining success by doing that, really reaching back to help. And I think a lot of times, unfortunately, because so many of us have struggled for so long, when we get into this entrepreneurial model, the focus is on self. And I get it. It's like you want to get out of debt, you want to stop running in the rat race, but at the same time, you can't be so focused on self that you're not looking at the greater good as well.
So do you feel that black people have a moral obligation to other black people?
Yes.
All right.
Do you?
No, of course
okay.
I do. But I think the assumption therein is that, you automatically off top, you should be thinking about, starting my business so I could quote unquote give back to the community, right? I don't think that, I don't think we currently live in a society that encourages that sort of communal mindset. It really is about getting yours. It's about, you know, the individual. You see what I'm saying?
And we live in a society where that's not only welcomed, but it's celebrated. Like you
What,
have
the individual, yeah, rags to riches. I did this by
I
myself.
just saw something the other day on social media. It was Floyd Mayweather, and he's like literally walking through his garage and showing all his cars, and I'm like, that's great. You have
I mean,
a
he fought
Maybach.
for it. See what I did there? See? Yeah, right.
But at the
Man.
same time, it's like, okay, and what are you doing with this wealth that you were able to attain?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's about
Buying
it's a
nice cars.
balance. It's
Yeah.
a balancing.
Is it a
act.
balance though?
I do. I think it's a balance.
Yeah.
You have to take care of home. What do they tell you when you're on an airplane? If the airplane goes down, put on your oxygen mask first. You got to do that. And then once you put it
I see what you're
on,
saying. I
you
see what
got
you're
to
saying.
help
Yeah.
somebody else.
That's what's up. Well, this has been another episode of 28 Days and Beyond.
Where we talk about our history, our heritage, and our culture. We'll see you next time.
Peace.